To say this product was a challenge would be an understatement. It's our first Half-Life title in over 10 years, and it's our first one in virtual reality. In addition to it being a great VR experience that still felt like a Half-Life game, we wanted Half-Life Alyx to serve players who've been waiting to find out what happens after Episode 2, and at the same time, provide an on-ramp to anyone who hasn't played a Half-Life game at all. Ultimately, whether we succeeded in any of that is up to you to decide, but hopefully, this commentary mode will give you some insight into the set of problems we faced and how we chose to tackle them. To listen to a commentary node, pick up the floating hologram of a radio headset in front of you and simply put it on your head. Once you're done listening to the commentary, you can take the radio headset off or simply put on the next one. Please let me know what you think. I can be reached at gaben@valvesoftware.com. While I'm unable to reply to all the emails I receive, I do read them all, and they're a critical part of the feedback we use to evaluate our work. Thanks, and have fun.
As in the case of any Half-Life game, the first hour of Alyx must convey a lot of information to the player, hopefully in a natural and entertaining way. Players need to know who they are, where they are, what kind of world they're in, who the other important characters and factions are, and so on. At the same time, they need to learn how to actually play the game. How do they move? What can they interact with and how? What should they be trying to do, etc. Figuring out exactly what information we would try to convey in these first two levels, and how it would be conveyed, took us over 2 years of playtesting. It's tempting to try and include everything we think a player should know, but all information has a priority, and the more we include, the more chance there is that a player misses something important because they're distracted or confused by something less important. So over the next 2 levels, we'll use commentary nodes to point out some of the specific places where we grappled with conveying information to the player. In between these nodes, you'll likely be able to spot many other examples for players to find, if they're interested in paying closer attention and understanding more.
pieces of important information we struggled to convey was exactly when Half-Life Alyx is set within the series timeline. Whilst we tried to reflect it carefully in many of the world details, it was never 100% successful during playtests. Eventually, we decided it was too important to be left to the players to figure out, and so we put it in our opening text crawl. The Citadel's incomplete state did provide us with an early opportunity to reinforce the timeline visually. Half-Life Alyx takes place 5 years before the events of Half-Life 2, in which the towering Citadel represents the Combine seat of power. As we see here, however, early Combine infrastructure is a cluttered mess of cables and unusual structures sprawled all over the city, surrounding the Citadel's construction, and served as a useful indicator of the time frame. We went on to reinforce this impression in other places throughout the following level. Combine architecture tends to be abstract in scale and form, so we included some familiar visual cliches of human construction: the large external scaffolds, some distinction of floor levels, rows of small lights, and the tidying of the silhouette into more structured vertical elements, try and strike a balance between capturing the alien nature of the Citadel whilst grounding its construction in enough familiarity to better understand its size and state. Large, sweeping vistas such as this one proved an interesting challenge in virtual reality. Their distance from the viewer means they don't benefit from stereoscopic vision the way that small close-up objects do. Because of this, the small objects on the balcony often draw the attention of the players before they've even noticed the imposing structure in the distance. If we moved the Citadel too close, it felt absurdly huge and difficult to take in. Yet placed alone on the horizon, it felt two-dimensional and flat. We found the solution in filling the space between the viewer and the distant structure with many scale references. The city itself, huge supply cables leading towards the vanishing point, large repeated Combine buildings, heavy pollution fog, careful lighting, and all the animated elements, especially the helicopter whose sound begins in the fade-in. All these were carefully composed to help draw the attention of the player to the Citadel first, before letting their attention wander to take in the details of the city, and settle ultimately on the inviting items here on the balcony.
First areas of the game, we grappled a lot with the density and prioritization of the information we were conveying to the player.
It's good, Dad.
Playtesting showed us that
Retrocop movement
players
is
in VR
normal.
were easily
Same for the
distracted,
Combine patrols.
often due to better peripheral
How's it going in the
vision,
stockyard?
such that they'd focus on one scene element while losing track of others. This was exacerbated in these first rooms because players were acclimatizing to being in VR, often for the first time. In addition, different players progress at different speeds. We saw some players spend
Don't
30
get
seconds
greedy,
on the
guys.
opening balcony
We're not
and
made of
others
time
30
here.
minutes. As a result, we did a lot of iteration over the set of opening
also,
areas,
as part of the
each
Combine
time
moving
changing
supplies
what
into the
information we
quarantine
tried
zone.
to convey
That place
and
has been
where.
deserted for
Initially,
years.
the video call from Eli took place in the later refuge room with the Snarkin camcorder, but players were often too engrossed in interacting with all of the detail in that room to pay attention to the conversation between Eli and Russell. We moved the video call out to the starting balcony, but there it distracted from the establishing shot of City 17 and the Citadel. It also came at a time when players were still figuring out core game elements like movement and hand interaction with the world. That collision made simple things hard, like when to show the player a movement tooltip if they immediately started the video call. Eventually, we settled on inserting the greenhouse between the starting balcony and the refuge, which allowed us to move the call to an area with a slightly obscured vista and fewer interactable objects. This avoided the distraction problems and ensured players were past the initial gameplay moments of figuring out their hardware and movement setup. It also had the bonus of allowing us to add further detail to the opening balcony and Alyx's refuge without fear of creating distractions from the video call.
Needed to demonstrate some of VR's strengths. Conveying a sense of scale is something VR does much better than flat screens, and our early playtests showed us that nothing quite sold that scale more than seeing a Strider up close. In addition to the visuals, to fully illustrate the scale of a Strider at close range, we needed to do a lot of work on its audio treatment. Players had strong expectations about feeling the weight, power and presence of the Strider through its movement, particularly as it stepped on the balcony the player was occupying. In order to convey this power through sound, we layered multiple sound effects, allowing us to address ranges in the audio frequency spectrum and the temporal nature of those elements separately. We then combined those elements in the Source 2 audio engine to control them as one sound.
This room, internally referred to as Alyx's Refuge, was initially the location where the Eli video call took place. However, once that video call was moved out to the balcony, this room was freed up to solve other problems. In the Half-Life series, we've always tried to ensure that there's generally enough narrative for all players to understand where they're going and why, but for players who slow down and pay attention, there's more detail that can lead to a greater understanding. With the balcony being a place to get familiar with the game's inputs, the greenhouse being where the story kicks off, and the Strider there to surprise players with spectacle, we decided that the refuge could be a quiet moment for players, where they could discover more narrative detail in the environment. At the same time, it could be a place where they can play around a bit more now that they're acclimated to being in VR. Spending time in the refuge is meant to bring players into Alyx's role in the Resistance and her place in the world. We wanted it to feel like a real stakeout spot, where Alyx had been cooped up for weeks or months while planning the heist, doing research on the Combine. The camcorder, snark, and whiteboards are all toys that respond to detailed interaction and reward deeper investigation, giving curious players more information about the world of City 17 and what Alyx has been doing in it.
Alyx, are we good?
Yep, they got the reactor. Easy peasy. I'm headed back to the safe house right now to meet Dad. Go! We'll be in touch.
Stay safe.
Alert, ground unit. Invasive operation of anti-citizen origin. Response code. Engage. When inquired.
Two critical pieces of information that we needed players to understand were simple to state, but not so easy to convey. That players were playing as Alyx Vance, not the Gordon Freeman they've played in all prior Half-Life games, and that Alyx is going to speak, unlike Gordon. These probably seem obvious to you now, but until we focused on them, it wasn't obvious to playtesters. Ensuring that everyone realized they were playing as Alyx was something we decided to hit with the biggest hammer we could, and name the product after her. But even with that, we were very careful in Eli's video call to ensure it's reinforced immediately. Olga, the character introduced here, was added to further drive it home by calling out when the player exits the elevator. Olga is the first character the player meets in person, and her dialogue here, and again ahead in the alley, is aimed at driving home the fact that she's conversing with the player, and that the disembodied female voice the player hears is Alyx speaking back. This was harder to convey in Eli's video call, because it already features Russell speaking off-screen, whereas in this scene, there's clearly no one else around in the conversational space other than Olga and the player. Without Olga, we found that even though they had already spoken to Eli and Russell over the video call, playtesters still didn't feel like they were Alyx.
When we started Half-Life Alyx, we were very curious to find out how VR would impact our music design. The Half-Life series has always used music sparingly, often leaving the ambient sounds of the world to provide the audio background. But it is a tool we like to use to highlight moments where the world state has changed in some important way. In this case, that something's riled up the Combine. In our early playtests of this scene, without music, but with many of the other visual and audio elements represented, we found some players didn't understand that they should move along, and that others became distracted by the interactive objects in the laundry. We experimented with some very simple quote-unquote action music to communicate the changing of the Combine threat level, as well as the story's intention for Alyx to get to safety, and found that players were less likely to forget their quest and move towards their goal. The music was kept simple and cinematic sounding to allow it to blend with the purposely complementary background sounds and gently start to normalize the use of music in VR in a familiar way. This success encouraged us to use the same technique in scenes with similar requirements later in the game.
Alyx, over here!
What is it?
This doesn't seem like a routine sweep. Are you sure everything went okay?
100%.
Something's got the CPs riled up.
Keep your head down and be smart.
level is designed to continue informing the player about the world they're in, and to support the increase in the Combine's alertness. We also wanted detail to make the city feel alive, something that becomes much harder later on, once the player has a weapon. This was tricky to design due to the challenge we're often faced with, the friction between narrative state and gameplay state. Here, the narrative implies that Alyx should be making her way back to Eli as quickly and quietly as possible. But gameplay-wise, we're at the start of the game, and players are still testing the limits of everything they can see and touch. Unsurprisingly, playtesting showed us that some players would dedicate themselves to following the narrative and quickly move through the area, while others would completely ignore the narrative and explore every nook and cranny. While it's tempting to simply remove all distractions in an attempt to unify all players towards following the narrative, it would send the wrong signal about the density of our world and how the game intends to reward players for exploring it. So we spent months refining this section, adding, changing, and removing elements. We tried to find the right level of narrative tension, where players felt like they should be moving along, but not so quickly that they can't stop to tinker with something. We put in enough interactive objects and narrative moments where players were always rewarded for looking around, but we designed all those distractions in quickly so we could encourage players to continue moving along.
I just live here.
Probably anti-citizen. Get those hands up!
Wait. Don't shoot!
Area securing. Give us names.
We didn't steal anything.
Don't care. What did you see?
No one! I didn't see anyone!
Get it out and take him to the transport.
Dad!
Look here.
Hey, wait, no! Where are you taking me?
In order to limit the
Where's my
possibility of
father?
motion sickness that could be induced by moving the player in the
Hello?
vehicle, we initially wrote this scene to have Alyx wake up after the van
Damn it,
Crash.
where's my father?
Players found this underwhelming, however, since the game seemed to be needlessly holding back on sections that they could have experienced for themselves. Addressing this meant that we had to tackle the technical problem of players coming to the vehicle. In this game, and in the train at the end of the game, we noticed the outside world is only visible from space. These outside views are demonstrated. Small window size ensures that the player's field of view is always dominated by the vehicle interior, which is naturally the player's own frame of reference. This greatly reduces the occurrence of motion sickness. Aside from the parallax of the outside world, we use animated lighting and careful sound design to produce the effect of riding in a vehicle.
You have been in an accident. Take the headset. Put on the headset.
Alyx, you there? You've got to get moving.
Russell? I've been in an accident.
I know! I caused it, so technically not an accident. You've got to get moving.
Wait, where's Dad?
He's fine. Follow the drone.
So, Dad's okay, right?
Yeah, well, no. To be honest, he's in huge trouble.
But...
They've still got him. He was in a separate transport.
So the last map was focused on
you
conveying
saved
a lot
me?
of
Well,
information
yes.
about the world
I had
stage
no
of
way
the
of knowing
player.
who was in which
This
van.
map is
So,
where we need to start
yes,
the player's
the
life
result
and
was
quest.
that I saved you.
That means
Do we
the
know where
player
they're
must
taking
read
him?
this map
Criminal
with an
holding.
understanding of what's
And then,
happened to Eli
when they realize he's
and
Eli
what they're going
Vance,
to do about it.
to Nova
The player
Prospect.
also needs to meet
But I'm
Russell,
already
so
working
they
on a
have
plan
face
to get him
behind
back.
all the radio
You're
dialogue
close to my
throughout
lab.
the game.
Keep following the drone.
Finally,
We'll
we
figure out
need
what
the
to do.
player to collect the gravity gloves and the pistol and learn how to use them both. This is a daunting list. From experience, we know that if we cram all that into a single scene, players won't be able to remember more than a couple highlights. So this map's purpose is essentially narrative pacing. We need to draw apart the required events, separating them with enough time and space the players could ingest and remember them. At the same time, we're a little under the gun. Playtesting showed us that by now, some players have been playing for 30 minutes, and they're wondering when they're going to see some enemies.
One of the first steps the writing team took on this map was to flesh out a scene between Russell and Alyx that covered all the dialogue we needed. Due to the fact the player is meeting Russell for the first time, and that there are a significant number of in-fiction events that Alyx and Russell need to talk about, the scene ended up containing a lot of dialogue. We knew there was no way we could build a scene that long without boring the player, and the most important elements would be lost in the noise.
Russell,
one of the first tools we used
what
to
did you
address
guys
this
find back there?
was the introduction of
Well, that's
Russell's
the crazy
drone.
thing. I don't
It
know.
allowed us to take chunks of the dialogue
blurry
from that
pictures
original
of a
scene and deliver them
building.
throughout the area
The
preceding
Citadel?
the scene.
No, something
This meant
else.
the scene itself
And whatever
could
it
skip
is,
over
they're
the
going to kill
in-fiction
anybody who saw
preliminaries
it.
and get
And
right
anybody
to
who
critical
knows
goal
anybody
delivery.
who saw it. Which means us and your dad.
Russell, just hang on. I'm almost there.
addition to delivering narrative at a consumable pace, this map needed to continue communicating the state of the world outside of the quarantine zone. We also wanted players to understand when Half-Life Alyx takes place in the larger Half-Life timeline, and to see for themselves the massive scale of the Citadel under construction. The power of the Combine is embodied in their indifference towards humanity. They've conquered Earth with little effort and are now plundering it for their own ends. They put a modicum of effort into their propaganda, but it's ultimately uncaring. Later in Half-Life 2, we see Breen's attempts to talk to humanity with more seriousness, but it's unclear whether that directive comes from the Combine or if it's just Breen's attempts to be useful to them. Meanwhile, the Combine construction is brutally efficient. The Citadel's pervasive feeder cables make no attempt to fit into the lives of the residents as the Combine drains the city of its power. Within this playground, a nostalgic nod to Half-Life 2, this enormous cable has been run right through the mural on the wall, demonstrating the Combine's total lack of interest in the history behind the city.
Alyx, everything cut out for a second. I lost the headset video feed. Can you see my drone? Is it okay?
Sure. Yeah, I'll be there in a minute.
Alyx? Alyx!
Where are you taking me? Where's my father? Hello? Damn it, where's my father?
Stop talking. Tell her to stop moving around back there. Stop moving. What is that? Get it! It's under the seat! Get it! Follow it! You have been in an accident. Take the headset.
Alyx, you there? You've got to get moving.
Russell? I've been in an accident.
I know! I caused it, so technically not an accident. You've got to get moving.
Wait, where's Dad?
He's fine. Follow the drone.
So, Dad's okay, right?
Yeah, well, no. To be honest, he's in huge trouble.
But...
They've still got him. He was in a separate transport.
And you saved me?
Well, yes. I had no way of knowing who was in which van, so... Yes, the result was that I saved you.
Do we know where they're taking him?
Criminal holding. And then, when they realize he's Eli Vance, to Nova Prospect. But I'm already working on a plan to get him back. You're close to my lab. Keep following the drone. We'll figure out what to do.
Russell, what did you guys find back there?
Well, that's the crazy thing. I don't know. Just blurry pictures of a building.
The Citadel?
No, something else. And whatever it is, they're gonna kill anybody who saw it. And anybody who knows anybody who saw it. Which means us and your dad.
Russell, just hang on. I'm almost there.
Alyx, everything cut out for a second. I lost the headset video feed. Can you see my drone? Is it okay?
Sure. Yeah, I'll be there in a minute.
Alyx, great. Okay, let's... Wait, my drone's okay, right?
Nope, it exploded. I'm fine, by the way.
Right, good. Well, that's the main.
Russell's laboratory is the first time the player is in the same room as another character, and it highlights one of the main challenges
Russell,
we face when designing
they've got
choreographed scenes
Dad.
in VR,
I know.
keeping the player and characters out of each
This
other's
is bad.
space. In
They're gonna
previous
find out what
Half-Life
he
games,
knows,
we could
and
always
then-
forcefully move the
yeah,
player
they're
if
gonna
we
kill
really
him.
needed them out
Oh,
of the way.
God.
We made several
But,
attempts at finding a similar
the good
solution
news
in
is,
VR,
we've
but
got
found that it
something they
often made
don't.
players
Which
feel deeply
is?
uncomfortable
My
or
plan
disoriented.
to get him back.
So
Great.
instead, we
Let's hear it.
designed these spaces to
Now,
allow
pretty
for a
soon they're gonna
natural
realize that your
separation
dad is
between the
not gonna
player
talk.
and our
When that
characters.
happens, he's off to have
Where
his brain
natural
fucked.
separators
Russell.
couldn't exist, we had to
Potentially,
restrict
maybe not.
players
Though.
from
I mean,
moving
they
into
could
the
just drill
character's
into
space, removing
yeah,
that limitation
still get
as
it.
soon as the character
Right,
had
well, what
moved
they
out
will
of the
do
way.
is take him by
Another
train from
challenge
here.
was balancing how often characters
is
respond to
Eli
player actions while
to
delivering important
Nova
narrative
Prospect.
information.
And if he gets
In
on that
early
train,
experiments, we allowed
that's it.
characters to stop mid-sentence,
Not
which allowed
necessarily.
them to respond
Grab something
immediately
that
to the
represents
player
us.
and then continue on with their dialogue. While technically straightforward, this was incredibly difficult to execute in animation and dialogue without feeling unnatural. The combination of custom reactions necessary to cover the range of possible player interaction and the resulting return to narrative
just
dialogue
grab anything.
quickly multiplied out
Okay,
of
that's
control.
you.
Eventually, we settled on a solution where we allowed only a minimum of interactions during the important narrative delivery sections, and a wider range of responses to more complex
Just outside, there's a
reactions
second
after
train
the scene
that
has
also
completed.
leads out of City
In the case
17
of Russell,
through the quarantine
we layer
zone.
subtle head facing and natural
Both
eye
trains
contact
intersect
on
here
top of his
at Fairview
performance while
Junction.
he is talking
You
with
take
Alyx.
your train,
Then,
get there
after
before
the
this
scene
train,
when he is
and
typing
hack
at the
into the
computer,
controls.
he will
That'll
respond
let
to
me
players
take over
trying
the
to
system.
touch him or objects
Train
being
comes to
thrown
a
around.
halt, you deal with the Combine situation, and we get your dad back.
Sounds good. Where's the train I'm taking?
Out the back, through the yard. It's decommissioned, but I think I can hack into its controls. Oh, and get yourself a pair of Russells on the way out.
Russells?
The gloves, Alyx. You know, the gravity gloves. I have a few sets through there. You can calibrate them out by the shed.
Got it.
We can do this, Alyx. You got that, didn't you, that I said we could do it? Because we're gonna do it.
Yeah, we are.
I'm with you every step of the way.
Right from our earliest experiments in VR, we learned that players expect a high level of audio fidelity, even from minute interactions, particularly when the sounds are meant to correspond to clearly observable visuals. For instance, in one of our prior games, it may have been acceptable to use a generic sequence of computer key sounds when Russell was typing. In VR, however, we know that a player can observe the animations very closely, and even put their head right next to Russell's keyboard if they choose. In this case, players would notice a lack of one-to-one correspondence between the key press animation and sound. For Half-Life Alyx, we authored a set of individual key press sounds to be driven by animation. For example, as Russell's fingers animate to press a key, one of these key press sounds is played, resulting in precise synchronization of the animation and sound.
Alright, you know how this goes. There should be a bunch of junk down there. Aim at something with your hand open.
Is having to physically bend down or reach out for objects in
Try
the
again.
virtual
You're
world,
on it.
especially if they have
One more
limited
time. Perfect.
real-world
We're done.
space.
Oh, wait.
A common
I
solution for
almost
this is
forgot.
to provide a way
Alex,
to bring
up here.
objects to
You're gonna
the
need a
player
gun.
instead of
Don't worry, it's
forcing the player to go to them. We knew this would be an important
unloaded
feature in
now.
Half-Life Alyx, with its sprawling levels and players' desire to explore every corner of the world. We didn't want this mechanic to feel too gamey
up the
or
gun, Alyx.
magical, so we decided to integrate it into the fiction of the game by making it a feature of the gravity gloves,
almost forgot. Guns
which are a
need ammo.
natural precursor to the gravity gun of
Here you
Half-Life
go.
2. This allowed us to present the mechanic as a real physical action that's enabled by a piece of in-fiction technology. To emphasize the physicality that is unique to the medium of VR, we used a physical gesture to activate the pull instead of a button press, and then required the player to actually catch the object instead of automatically attaching
Russell,
it to the hand.
I'm out.
This made the mechanic feel more natural and rooted in the fiction of the game's universe, while allowing the player to feel powerful and accomplished.
When a player pulls an object with the gravity gloves, we use the game's physics engine to apply a launch force to that object with a trajectory that is partially influenced by the direction of the player's pull gesture. We set the object's launch velocity to result in a standard flight time from pull to catch, so the player can develop a rhythm that eventually becomes automatic. We want the object to arrive at the hand as reliably as possible, so after the initial launch, we continually apply small impulse forces along the trajectory, represented by the white arrows. Those impulses help counter gravity and compensate for collisions with obstacles along the way, while continuously steering the object toward the hand, which is itself a moving target. A generous cat range and subtle haptic feedback when the object enters that range virtually guarantees that it will end up in the player's hand every time, even if their attention is focused elsewhere. One other benefit of implementing this with physics is that we didn't need to do custom handling for an object's size, mass, or inertia, and it automatically compensated for the non-standard gravity that players encounter inside the vault at the end of the game.
Hey, Russell? I'm out again.
Heads up! Oh, you took care of that lock then. Good. Great. Did have the key for it, but should have given you that. That's on me. All right, here we go. Next stop, Fairview Junction.
Thanks, Russell.
And good luck, Alyx. Goodbye. Obviously, just to let you know, I am still here, though.
I know.
Hello, Alyx? We might have a problem. Probably nothing to worry about, but... Did the train stop? It stopped, didn't it?
Yeah, what happened?
Oh, it's jammed. When the Combine shut down the quarantine zone, they must have tightened security.
Which means?
Yeah, you're nowhere near Fairview Junction. You're just outside the QZ. And this is as far as we get by train.
Then I'm headed on foot.
Good. I'll see if I can get you in some other way.
I got a dead zombie here. I thought the
the
Combine
gravity
sealed up the
gloves.
QZ.
We use the game's physics
This
engine
one must
to
have
apply
squirted
a
out.
ground force to that
I've heard they've had trouble with barnacle spores outside the containment area, but not about fellas like this.
Probably not a one-off then.
I doubt it. Ah, would you look at that? Resin. And if there's resin around here, there should be a Combine fabricator. Keep an eye out. We might be able to upgrade your firepower a bit.
Players enjoyed exploring every nook and cranny of the environment. With the increased fidelity of VR, players not only expected to be able to interact with a vast array of objects, but they also had a strong desire to find something useful from time to time. This was so universal among testers that in addition to more searchable locations and interactive objects, we added a new resource, resin. Level designers could place this new resource in fun and interesting locations that weren't tied to game progression, rewarding players wider-ranging exploration. We also tied this new resource to a longer-term goal in the form of weapon upgrades, further motivating players to explore the environment. Deep scavenger hunts and keen observation would result in more resin to spend as a reward.
Internally, we refer to this type of puzzle as a toner puzzle, due to its similarity
I
to
can
a
reroute this
real-world
with my
cable
multi-tool.
toner tool that can
You
be
what?
used to locate
It's
electrical
a tool with
wires
multiple
and walls.
functions. So,
The
you
toner
know,
mechanic was
multi-tool.
conceived as a tool for designers to craft player
Alex,
experiences
that thing's
around
incredible.
knowing that the
You
player
need an
had to put
incredible
their head and
brand name.
hands in
Something
specific
that really
positions.
sells it.
Who am
The
I going
initial
to sell it
design
to?
merely required the
Combine's
player
not going
to
to be
use
here
their
forever.
multi-tool to
You
push
should
a
be thinking
ball of
about the
energy
future,
along a path,
Well,
similar to a
how about
child's
I
bead
call
maze
it
toy.
the
While this simple design
Alyx.
was successful at getting the player to put
It's
their
not all
head and
derivative
hands
of the
in particular
Russell, but
locations,
yeah,
the lack
provisionally,
of branching
sure.
meant that
The
the player
Alyx.
wasn't required to make
Yeah.
any choices, nor was there any
Alyx.
possibility of negative consequences. To address these issues, we added the rotating junction elements, which allowed for branching paths and became the player's primary means of interacting with toner puzzles. While the toner puzzles ramp up in complexity throughout the game, this first toner puzzle is designed to use a minimal number of elements to introduce players to the key ideas that power flows through wires, power can be rerouted by rotating junctions, and power has an effect on the physical world, such as turning on lights and opening gates. The sparking electrical outlet that branches down toward the floor is not strictly necessary for this simple puzzle, but it was added here to expose players to its behavior, since it was causing confusion in later puzzles when players were seeing it for the first time in more complex configurations.
From our earliest experiments in VR, we realized how critical high-quality, high-density
careful of that
lighting
barnacle,
was to
Alyx.
conveying a sense of realism. In game development, any technology choice involves trade-offs between quality, runtime performance, and development time. For Half-Life Alyx, we chose a high-quality, high-performance light mapping solution which required a significant amount of offline preprocessing. We performed light map preprocessing using a render farm, which could take several hours for a single map at the highest quality, and we put a lot of effort into mitigating the cost of that high iteration time for designers on the team. Specifically, we implemented a real-time approximation to the final lighting result, which allowed designers to light scenes in real time with confidence that the high-performance light maps would match their intent. Most lights in Half-Life Alyx are baked into a single term that describes distance falloff and shadowing, allowing us to change the brightness and color of lights in real time at no cost. This encoding also allows us to apply shadows from dynamic props and characters without having to render any static geometry into shadow maps. Our light maps store directional information using the popular ambient highlight direction encoding, an improvement over Valve's own radiosity normal mapping technique pioneered in Half-Life 2. This new light map encoding ensures that the bumpy surfaces can appear bumpy even when not under direct light. This blinking light source provides a good illustration of this technique, as you can perceive the surface detail even during times the light source is off.
Barnacles, while an iconic Half-Life creature, presented some interesting VR-specific challenges. While their tongue is intended to trap
How'd you meet my
hasty
dad,
or
anyway?
unobservant players,
You guys work together
those
at
caught
Black
by them
Mesa,
often
right?
didn't realize
Yeah,
what was happening.
well, no.
They would become
Tricky place to
disoriented
get a
or
job
even
at,
motion
actually.
sick as the
I
barnacle
interviewed
lifted
at
them
Black
up to
Mesa.
be
They said try again in
These
a year.
unfortunate players almost
I don't need to
universally
tell you what
died
happened after
and
that.
failed to learn what was
Lucky
happening
break for
even
me,
after
really.
multiple encounters.
Not a lot of survivors.
To address this issue, we created the tongue
Honestly,
as a
it's a
particle
miracle
system.
you and your dad
This
got
allowed
out
us
of
to both physically simulate it as well as reliably position it for maximum visibility. If a player does get grabbed by a barnacle, the tongue always
Three
wraps right in
mags
front of their
left.
face, no matter which direction they try to look. This makes the tongue almost impossible to miss and visually guides the player's eyes up to the location of the barnacle, so they know where to shoot to free themselves. These fixation visuals that kick in as the player is being lifted not only serve to communicate the damage the player is taking,
but they also help to reduce motion sickness by narrowing the player's field of view. These changes, combined with sound effects and other visuals like seeing stars and blacking out, eliminate confusion for players and enabled us to bring this classic enemy into the world of Half-Life Alyx.
Last one.
We got a lot of positive feedback from our initial experiments requiring players to perform a series of physical actions to reload the pistol. Specifically, ejecting the clip, retrieving a new clip from their backpack, inserting the clip into the gun, and chambering around. Players enjoyed learning and improving at this skill. We experimented with using a single button for both ejecting a clip and chambering around, but we found that assigning these operations to two different buttons was more interesting, even though it was more mentally taxing. In fact, it was more interesting precisely because it was more mentally taxing, as players would frequently mix up the buttons under pressure. In the early stages of the game, players would be fumbling for clips, ejecting the clips when they meant to be chambering around, and generally making a mess. To those of us observing the playtest, this looked like things had gone horribly wrong, but players themselves consistently cited this as a high point of their playthroughs. Because of the physical nature of the reload, and the skill required, players blamed themselves and not the game for the mistakes made as they were learning the reloading sequence. In this area, we provide a number of static targets in the form of barnacles for players to shoot at their own pace, increasing the likelihood that they have at least a few reloads under their belt before moving on.
I take it the quarantine zone is behind this hatch?
Yeah, that's where they keep it.
I'll look around for a control panel to open it up.
prior Half-Life games, while playing as Gordon, the player saw Alyx use her multi-tool to hack into Combine security systems in order to unlock doors or perform other acts of sabotage. This presented an opportunity for us to to represent Alyx's hacking skills through VR-centric minigames. All of our hacking minigame designs
You know,
were
Russell,
built to leverage the independently
now
tracked
that I'm
head and
walking
hands
into the
common to
quarantine
today's VR
zone, it just
systems.
hit me.
We wanted to
I don't know
encourage
anything
players
about
to
the
use both
quarantine
hands
zone.
simultaneously
Well, actually, the
and
word
move their head to
quarantine
create
comes from the
parallax to
Italian
understand the
quaranta
spatial
giorni,
relationships
which
within
means
the
40
puzzles.
days, the period that
locker
all
hacking
ships
puzzle
were
is
required
based
to be
upon one of our
isolated
earliest
before crew
prototypes,
could go
in which
ashore
the player
during
was
the Black
tasked with
Death.
using a tool in one hand to
Alright.
paint a path on a sphere
Cool.
held by the other hand. There was just something fun and unique about using all of the
That's the
natural
control
degrees of
panel.
freedom
They've
of
probably
both hands
scrambled
to
the
solve a
circuit.
puzzle in VR.
Considering no one would be
In
dumb
its
enough to
simplest
open the
form,
hatch,
this
it shouldn't
puzzle
be too hard
solution
to
is
put back.
straightforward, but the difficulty gradually increases throughout the course of the game by introducing static or moving obstacles of various shapes and sizes on the sphere.
Haha! There we go, finally.
I'm gonna head in. How far is Fairview Junction?
You'll go through the old subway tunnels on your way to the train yard.
Have they started moving Dad yet?
I don't think so, which is good news because we've still got time.
Oh, that's great. Whoa. Russell, are you seeing this?
Whoa.
Alright. Here we go.
In our early prototypes, players
Hey,
could heal
Russell,
themselves by grabbing
I just found a
Half-Life
loose
2
syringe of
health pack
God
and
knows
pressing
what.
down on a
Is
controller
this medicine?
button, which obviously wasn't a
Does
very
it have a
interesting
skull and
VR
crossbones on
mechanic.
it?
During the development of
don't
Half-Life Alyx,
see
the
one.
Counter-Strike team added health
Probably
injectors into
medicine,
CSGO as part of the new Danger Zone game mode they were developing. When we saw this, we felt that an injector would work well as an intuitive healing item in VR as well. Players would press a button to arm the injector as a way of indicating their
Do you hear
intent
that?
to use it. This prevented unintentional use of the injector and gave us an opportunity to showcase how
boy.
physical the interaction was
Yeah,
going to be via
that's the
haptics,
way we gotta go.
animation, and sound.
No shortcut?
Some testers
Yeah, that
even initially
is
responded with
the
dread
shortcut.
over the fact they were going to have to use a needle on themselves and looked away when performing the injection action. We also had to create approximations of the player's arms and body, as playtesters all had their own preferences for where they wanted to apply the injection. We even added the ability to inject into the head since so many players tried to do it just to see if it would work.
We had to ensure that players would become proficient at reloading their pistol during the early levels of the game, or later encounters in the game would be overly difficult. The prior map contained only static targets.
Alright, that seemed to work.
Players
Keep
could
doing
engage
that.
the barnacles at their own pace, but there were enough of them that players would need to reload at least a few times. This first live zombie is locked behind the chain link fence and cannot reach the player until the player opts into the encounter by shooting the lock on the door. The placement of zombies in the upcoming section of the game is designed to require plenty of reloading, to ensure that the player builds up this skill.
Virtual reality provides the opportunity to add physicality to gameplay, but this needs to be balanced against player fatigue and accessibility. For example, we experimented with a low ceiling in this area, requiring players to crouch the whole time that they made their way across the tops of these train cars. Playtesters did not enjoy having to crouch for so long, so we raised the ceiling.
Oh boy.
Yeah, be careful.
Virtual
Breakable glass panels in Half-Life Alyx are yet one more system designed to convince players that they are present in a living, breathing world. The panels detect the position of an incoming impact and procedurally generate new, smaller glass panels in a radial pattern around the impact position. These new panels can then break into smaller panels themselves, and so on. We found that players would often break glass panels accidentally, then spend time testing just how interactive they really were by trying to break them more, eventually realizing that yes, the glass really did shatter at the appropriate location. At one point, we experimented with building special puzzles out of breakable glass, but in the end we found the glass to be more appropriate as a passive interactive element, one that reacts in a satisfying way to a variety of impacts, from zombie melee attacks to incoming gunfire, or any other physical interaction in the game.
Alyx,
Weapon
I think that's a
upgrades are
combine
new feature for
fabricator.
the Half-Life
Put
franchise.
something in it. I want
And
to see how this
fictionally,
thing
this
works.
mechanic paired
Guys,
well with Alyx's tinkering
Will it
nature.
work on the Russells?
We approached
No,
this
but it should
design
fix up
challenge
that pistol
first
nicely.
by thinking
Good
about
thing,
what sort
too,
of
I gave
upgrades
you one
could
of my
be
lesser
meaningful
guns.
and also provide
Thanks,
additional
Russell.
value to players
Well, you know, in case
without
of
removing
make it
established
back.
interactions.
Tell you what, Russell.
With limited resin
if I
to
die,
spend,
I
the
owe you a
upgrade
gun.
system also
You owe me a
provided
gun
an
anyway.
avenue for
That
players to
wasn't a gift.
personalize and
That's
invest
my
in their
gun.
favorite weapon, or streamline an interaction on another weapon, increasing its value to them. For example, the reflex sight still requires players to physically aim, but it improves the feedback on exactly where their shot will hit, and exposes previously hidden enemy weak points. While some players enjoyed this feedback and new targeting opportunities, others didn't and would instead focus on upgrades that suited their style of play. This allowed players to spend their limited resin on upgrades they cared about the most. Another aspect of weapon upgrades that we focused on was not necessarily obvious when we first started to design and test combat in VR. Due to the more physical nature of combat in VR, it can really push on the mental and physical capacity of certain players, as they're required to utilize both their hands and move their head to take in the environment dealing with enemies. While this is a very natural experience, there's also a lot going on at any given point with reloading and combat. As we observed players in some of these more intense combat situations, we started finding opportunities to allow some upgrades to reduce the number of times a physical interaction was required, or reduce the complexity of a particular interaction. The autoloader on the shotgun is a good example. When added to the shotgun, the normally slow, methodical action of feeding shells into the gun is replaced with a far simpler, faster interaction of slapping the shells into the autoloader before they get automatically fed into the gun. This allows players to look around, focus less on the gun while reloading, and to take in more of what's going on around them.
At the beginning of the Half-Life Alyx project, we had the expectation that players would want to take a break after 30 to 45 minutes, since that's what we were seeing with the lab and other small-scale VR experiences available. Because of this, we designed the pacing of the game's levels around play sessions for that break. Over the course of development, however, the game itself included more downtime between intense combat encounters, and the comfort of the new crop of HMDs improved significantly. In fact, as the game progressed, we found that players were happy to play for hours on end. At the end of the playtest, players would often remark that this was the longest they'd ever played VR in a single session.
Three more.
Nice shooting, Alyx.
Thanks. You know, for all your talk about what a lesser gun this is, this thing isn't half bad.
Head crab!
I see it.
Until this point in the game, players have only seen headcrabs attached to the heads of zombies. This led playtesters familiar with headcrabs from prior games to anticipate encountering them on their own. We decided to play up this anticipation by foreshadowing the first headcrab encounter with a headcrab that drops out of a vent before disappearing, as well as headcrabs in the environment, including a
max
threatening
left.
headcrab sound coming from the partially boarded up doorway ahead.
Where to go? Ah! Yep, there it is. Found it. Probably only one of those. Okay, two of those.
3 left. Heard anything about Dad, Russell?
No. Radio silence since he got on the train.
Damn it.
Well, the good news is he's probably fine.
How do you know that?
Because they're taking him to Nova Prospect to torture him. That's the torture place. So they're hardly going to torture him before they get there. So he's fine. Logically speaking.
Ah!
That there is a floppy disk. We used to store information on them, with magnets, if you can believe it.
Huh.
Specifically, 2 micrometers magnetic iron oxide, 3 micrometers barium ferrite, 1.2...
Russell? How do you know all this?
I'm reading it here on my computer. I downloaded the internet before the war.
You downloaded the entire internet.
Most of it.
Nice.
Yeah, it is.
Russell, are you seeing this?
Possibly. Are you seeing floating garbage?
It looks like it's just cardboard.
Right. Well, seems harmless.
Yeah. Weird, though. What is that?
Themes and motifs used throughout the game to represent unspoken aspects of the story and lore. For example, the Vortigons play an integral role in the
Somebody
subplot
spent a
of the game,
lot of time on
and we
this.
chose to use music to subconsciously communicate the repeating nature of their role both in the timeline of Half-Life Alyx and in the larger timeline of the Half-Life saga. Within the music in this scene, you'll hear variations of themes used throughout the timeline of the game, from the very first sounds of the game up to the finale in the vault. Variations of these motifs represent the imprisoned chanting of the Vortigaunts, the extraction of their energy to confine
Whoa.
the genie,
More floating cardboard.
as well as historically familiar sounds representing the vortessence itself.
There are two layers to the markings on the walls in this area. The square and dot patterns, that are the functional elements of the environmental puzzle, and the mural representing the Vortigaunt's interpretation of the events of the Half-Life saga. For the first few years of development, this area only contained the dot patterns supporting the perspective puzzle. But as we fleshed out the rest of the level, we found that playtesters responded especially positively to the Vortigaunt's wall markings leading up to the hideout. It was at this point that we realized that this area could serve as a canvas for our Vortigaunt's artistic magnum opus. To do this, we organized the dot patterns into a sort of swirling star field behind the Vortigaunt's art. The imagery itself, which was inspired by petroglyphs and other traditional rock art, portrays many significant events from the Combine invasion, painted hurriedly by the injured Vortigaunt, almost as if he was trying to capture what fleeting memories he still had of the vortessence from which he had been severed. The fact that Vortigaunts have a complicated relationship with time gave us a lot of leeway in terms of drawing this as a strict, linear timeline. For example, you may notice that the Vortigaunt uses contemporary Combine troops as shorthand for Combine invasions from the past, or that the timeline is just generally hazy. A little from the past, little from the present, and a little looking forward to the future events of Half-Life 2.
Alyx, you alright? What's wrong?
I'm fine, Russell. What's up?
I'm losing your signal. Alyx? Alyx, if you can still hear me, keep heading in the same direction and try to get above ground.
Russell? Russell? Crap. Whoa. This is weird.
During our earliest attempts to raid Alyx, our instinct was to have her react to absolutely everything. But what we learned from playtesting was that Alyx reacting too much could actually be off-putting. Say a player is in a really tense, zombie-filled level, and they're having a great time, but suddenly Alyx is in their head, sounding angry, or frightened, or
Alyx
anxious.
fans.
These Alyx reactions were creating a disconnect between how the player was feeling and how the character they were role-playing as was feeling. So we took a lot of those out. The Alyx reactions we left in tended to be the ones that were practically universal. Alyx's reaction here to the surreal entrance to the Vort hideout is a good example, where it was just so different from everything the player had seen up until then, and kind of takes you by surprise. We watched so many playtests where the player would see it and say, "Whoa,
what's
that's
a
weird."
Vortigaunt doing
So we had Alyx
here?
say the same thing a second later, almost like an echo.
Cooking.
Right, but I mean, in general.
I have a brain injury.
Oh, I'm sorry to...
My brain is injured.
That's terrible,
Ow.
and I hope... Look, I'm actually pretty busy looking for my father.
The
Eli Vance.
Vance, yes.
The Combine have him, and I really do need to get moving.
The Combine, yes. Do not go.
Long as we've been making choreographed scenes like this
Look,
one,
I appreciate
we've
it.
found that
I
there
can't
are
stick
two
around.
types of players.
It is
Those who
important.
become engrossed
I
with
know,
the
I'm sure it
characters,
is.
and
The
those
Alyx
who tinker
Vance
with everything around
must
them,
go
paying
this
little
way
attention to the scene's
anyway.
action. To make these environments entertaining for the tinkerers, we usually add objects for them to find and play with. Since this scene is split into 2 rooms, we were able to add a large number of interactions to this first room for players to discover after the Vortigaunt has moved to the second room. Some interactive objects are pure physically driven toys, like the dangling headcrab corpses and the hanging pans. Others are animations triggered by the player's actions, like the way the caged headcrabs react to the player approaching or shooting them. One type of object on the table, the squeezable headcrab heart, which is a remnant from an older version of the scene, where the player would revive the wounded Vortigaunt by squeezing nectar.
The Alyx Vance.
While that scene didn't work out, we found the experience
I would help.
too compelling
I really
and, well,
would, but
gross.
the Alyx Vance is honestly very busy saving her dad.
You will not save him. He is dead.
What?
Or he will be.
Is or will be?
It is a matter of perspective.
Without
But
undermining
Alyx
the
Vance
delivery
alone
of critical
cannot
gameplay
prevent
information.
his fate.
In this case,
Look,
the player needed to
thank
leave
you
the
for
scene with the knowledge
everything,
that the
but
Vortigaunts have been
I
imprisoned
really have
and
to
that the
go.
player
And
should
I'm
seek
sorry, but I
the
really
Northern
don't have
Star.
time for riddles.
This
No
particular
riddles.
scene went through many
The
different
Combine
variations of
drilled
development.
here.
From a
I
cooking
am
scene with an
severed from the
extremely traumatized
vortessence.
Vortigaunt to this humorous version. We even experimented with an interaction where the player was required to
sorry.
squeeze the nectar of several headcrab hearts into the
Look,
Vortigaunt's mouth to
if I
revive
can,
him.
if I
While
run
this
across
was
your
a
friends,
memorable and novel
I will
VR
see what I can
interaction
do.
that ensured the player was
You have
engaged
saved
with the
my
scene,
kin.
the interactivity on
I
the player's part often
haven't.
resulted in
Then you
playtesters
will.
remembering the actions they took, but not critical game information. Eventually,
Courage,
we
Alyx
ended
Vance.
up with this more humorous scene, which struck an effective balance between entertainment and goal delivery. Importantly, we also distributed the scene across 2 separate rooms, breaking the information delivery into 2 steps. The first room where the player
Your
meets and
mission
learns about the state of the Vortigaunt, and the second room where the player is given their new goal. Separating these physically into rooms seemed to help players more reliably retain the critical information delivered in the second room. While this scene did
Your
undergo a lot
journey
of changes,
brings you this
one story
far.
beat remained virtually
Just a
unchanged
little
from the very first roughed-in version. The moment the Vortigaunt tosses a head crab carcass down to the player and yells, "Sustenance!" Right from the start, this moment always got a great reaction from playtesters and remained all the way to the final product.
You must go. I will help the Alyx Vance. Look to the Northern Star.
Why?
For guidance.
Okay, thanks. Are you done helping?
I am not. Here. Sustenance.
I'll eat it later. Thanks for the help.
You will be welcome.
Alyx, the signal's back. Can you hear me? Are you okay?
Russell, I'm good. How's Dad?
They've got him on the train. He's on the move. You've got to find Fairview Junction before they get there.
I'm working on it. That's weird.
So anything happened when you cut out?
You're not gonna believe this, but I ran into a Vortigaunt.
A Vortigaunt? What was he doing down there?
Game design
Hiding.
thinking about how the
I
player
think he
is
escaped from
expected
the
to learn
Combine.
of its existence
What did he
and
say?
understand its details.
You ever meet a Vortigaunt?
Some design elements
He
are so
said
important that
crazy
the game
Vortigaunt.
experience will break if
He
the player
meant
doesn't understand them, while others may just be fun diversions or rewards for exploring the game's system. Any required element will require work on our part to teach the player. In Half-Life, we try to teach elements in ways that feel as natural as possible and twined within the core flow of the game so that you don't feel like the game just stopped to teach you something. We don't always succeed, but the attempts usually lead us somewhere interesting. In this case, we need to teach the players about the armored headcrab. The key elements that we want them to understand are that the headcrab is invulnerable on the top, but has a weak spot on its belly. We would also like the player to learn that the headcrab exposes its weak spot right before it jumps, but this isn't required. The player can fall back to shooting the weak spot as the headcrab scrambles around after a leap.
With any section of natural entwined training, we've observed that there's rarely any one thing that succeeds in teaching all players, nor do 100% of players leave with the perfect understanding we'd like. If player understanding is absolutely critical, we have to build a more bulletproof gate that ensures the player demonstrates understanding before moving onwards. In fact, we do just that when the player acquires the shotgun in the next area. In the case of the armoured headcrab, however, playtesting showed that we could afford to let a few players through with less than perfect understanding.
Oh,
This
that
section
Vortigaunt I
gave
met?
them enough of a chance to
did give me a
experiment
headcrab to
that they
eat.
got a sense of what was going
What
on,
did it taste like?
and
Tell me
further
how you-
encounters with armoured headcrabs
I
solidified
didn't
it.
eat it.
There was
Right.
still a lot of
Of
iteration
course you
on the
didn't.
visual
No,
design
that's-
of the
that's
headcrab
right.
to further drive home its armour and weak point, and we also added a custom response to shotgun fire. In that case, the armoured headcrab flips over and wriggles for a second, exposing its weak point. This was added to reduce the resource loss we saw happening in players who were still struggling to understand the armoured headcrab mechanics after they acquired the shotgun.
Oh, that zombie has a shotgun.
One challenge we always face when giving a new weapon or tool to the player is ensuring that they collect it before moving on. In these cases, we try to establish some kind of gate that the player can only get past using the new item. This can be especially tricky in cases where we are giving the player a new tool that doesn't fundamentally change their capabilities, as in the case of the shotgun, where almost everything that can be done with the shotgun can also be done with the pistol.
Do you hear that?
In contrast, the pistol gate, where the player had to
this
acquire
shotgun
the pistol before
get
being
outta
able to
here.
shoot the lock off of the fence back at Russell's lab, was simple to design and execute. For this shotgun gate, we not only needed to ensure that the player collected the shotgun, but also that they learned how to load it before proceeding. We playtested a number of approaches to teaching the reload mechanics during combat, and repeatedly found that it didn't work. When faced with learning a new, complex task under duress, players would retreat back to using their pistol, which was a known quantity to them.
Once the player has collected the shotgun, they are only halfway through the shotgun gate. Next, they need to learn how to reload it. To drive home the necessity for the player to learn how to use this new weapon, we added an incoming threat, using a variety of audio and visual effects to sell it. While our goal is to make the player feel like they have a limited amount of time, the time pressure is entirely fake, and everything proceeds based on the player's progress in loading the shotgun for the first time. Once the shotgun has been loaded, a short timer starts, after which zombies burst through the walls. If the player happens to look at the walls before that timer is up, we abort the timer and introduce the zombies. The combination of a timer and a look trigger is a common trick used in places where we'd like the player to see a neat visual moment, but we can't wait forever or the game simply won't progress. The breaking of the walls by the zombies is the final step in opening the shotgun gate. Having new enemies open the way forward when they enter the player's space is a fairly tried and true method, but it's never one we're particularly happy with. It's always a bit too convenient and lacks agency on the player's part. But in a setup like this, which contains a novel puzzle, a new weapon, and its associated mechanics, plus an ambush, we're already dealing with a lot of design complexity packed into a small space, and further additions would complicate the scenario even further.
Oh, got it.
Hurry up and load that thing. It's getting louder.
We did it.
I love this gun.
The visual design of the shotgun included a number of challenges. Shotguns in games are generally powerful, and we communicate that power with bulk. As a result, they're big and held in two hands. But our experiments with two-handed VR weaponry didn't reach a level we were satisfied with. When holding a two-handed object in real life, the object itself provides a physical connection between the two hands, and that constraint allows players to stop thinking about it consciously, in addition to providing physical feedback. In VR, without that connection or feedback, we found that players had to keep maintaining their own internal sense of how they were holding their two-handed weapon, or they dripped their hands into positions that were hard for us to reconcile.
3 magazines.
As a result, our two-handed weapons required players to play along more than we liked. Since one of our core goals with Half-Life Alyx was to allow players to fully immerse themselves by ceasing to think about what they were doing in real life, we decided to focus on single-handed weapons, including the shotgun.
Our initial instinct with the shotgun design was to use a regular real-world shotgun, but modified, with a sawn-off stock and barrel so it would seem less cumbersome when held with one hand. This approach always resulted in the handle being at the rear of the weapon, and we ran into the problem where the weapon always felt front-heavy. But obviously, the VR controller in your hand wouldn't reflect that, leading to a disconnect between what you were feeling and what you were seeing. Placing the handle more centrally and underneath the weapon helped avoid this disconnect. This implied centre of mass wasn't really maintained well as the weapon accrued upgrades throughout the game, but the first impression was the most critical. Since we were going with an odd form, we were keen to use common shotgun visual elements wherever we could to help with player recognition and to ground the design in some reality. One element we borrowed was a common shotgun tube magazine that stores shells horizontally.
It was on your face and it,
we were just able to fit the gameplay requirement of 6 shells without the overall length becoming unwieldy. You can see the effort we had to go for further shell capacity in the design of our autoloader upgrade.
Last 2 shells.
Our first reloading mechanic was based on the realistic insertion of 1 shell at a time. Playtesters found this to be overly tedious, although we did receive some positive comments that made it feel like an action movie still. The simple addition of allowing players to insert 2 shells at a time solved this issue.
One left.
To keep the good part of the design whilst it was in play. We were keen to reinforce the quick action movie style thing, and experimented with some big gesture the player could do to finalise reloading. The inclusion of the pop-up mechanism allowed us to add an additional step to the reload, which further separated it from our other weapons, yet had a satisfying flick of the wrist to complete the action.
No more mags. Last minute. 3 shells left.
Too dark. You'll need a flashlight.
I think you're right.
As with the shotgun and the pistol, we needed a gate for the flashlight to ensure the player couldn't proceed without it. We tried a number of designs around the moment where the player collected the flashlight, but they all ended up being about the player picking up an object, and not specific to that object being a flashlight. Given that the flashlight's primary function is to provide light, we felt the gate needed to be an area of darkness. We also really wanted the player to be excited to get the flashlight, and that meant they had to experience darkness before collecting the flashlight. This turned out to be an interesting challenge, because we already had many poorly lit areas prior to this, and now we needed an area that was so dark that players would correctly interpret it as a gate. Our initial implementation was simply to ensure there were no lights within the hallway.
Oh, that
Unfortunately,
really worked, didn't it?
playtesting immediately showed that wasn't enough. Some VR headsets have extremely low black levels, and on those headsets, enough light bounced in from this lit area to enable players to move forward. In addition, our low ground fog provided just enough contrast in the dark hallway for players to make out the scene and stumble through it. Even once we removed fog and bounce light in this area, we saw yet other ways that players tried to move forward. Some players would fire their pistol repeatedly, using the muzzle flash as a strobing light source. Others would use the teleport targeting UI to probe the room, because at that point in the project, it had a small light source attached to it. In the end, we disabled muzzle flashes inside the hallway, and the teleport UI lost its light. The final step was the addition of some dialogue from Alyx, commenting on the darkness and her need for a light source. This was aimed at solving a perceptual problem. Up until now, our game has taught players that their goal is to continue moving forward.
and anytime that forward progress is blocked, it's because there's something in the local area that needs solving. Given that structure, it's entirely rational for players to do everything they can to find some way to see in the darkness ahead. Alyx's dialogue is aimed at telling the player that the game has recognized their attempts to move forward here, but the solution lies elsewhere. Subsequent playtesting showed us that this dialogue, coupled with the brightly lit area containing zombies off to the right, helped tug players past the darkness entrance and on towards the flashlight.
Like hacking and environmental puzzles, toner puzzles like this one are often used to relieve tension from combat and engage the player's mind in a refreshing way. This puzzle introduces a new junction type, which has 2 inputs and 2 outputs, as well as branching circuits. Functionally, it's just a simple airlock. Only one of the main combine gates can be powered on at a time, with an additional wrinkle that the smaller side gate on the return path must be powered down separately. In addition to providing a break between hectic combat encounters, this puzzle is a gameplay mechanic refresher, since it's been some time since the player has seen a toner puzzle, and the next ones start to ramp up in complexity.
Whew. It is dark.
Everything all right?
Nope, I'm good. I'm good. 4 shells left.
In prior Half-Life games, the flashlight was attached to the player's body, which meant that it always illuminated the world from the same angle, relative to the player's point of view. With tracked hands in VR, we had the opportunity to let players manipulate the flashlight directly, and playtesters reacted very positively to this new freedom.
Oh,
in fact, our earliest implementation of a flashlight in Half-Life Alyx was an object that could be picked up in either hand or even set back down. This allowed the player to put the flashlight down somewhere, providing illumination for themselves while they accomplished another task. Unfortunately, this presented the possibility that a player could leave the flashlight behind, which would have been a game-breaking scenario. Implementing the flashlight as an object that players had to hold also prevented them from holding something else in that hand, which was tedious and simply didn't function much. In particular, it meant that weapon reloading was a nightmare, because the player no longer had a free offhand to perform the reload actions. In the end, we settled on a flashlight that attaches to the offhand and turns on and off automatically. This fixes the issues with reloading in the dark, potentially losing the flashlight, and has the nice side effect of not requiring the allocation of a button to toggle the light, which is especially helpful on controllers with fewer buttons. Since the automatic on-off behavior is controlled using level logic,
really dark.
designers can make performance and quality trade-offs in different
Can you
areas of the
just
game.
talk?
After all, if a
About
player
what?
could turn the flashlight on at any time,
Literally
the
anything.
rendering overhead
Well, I
of the
think that
shadow
given our
casting light
situation,
source
your
would have to be
irrational
accounted
fear
for
of the
throughout
dark
the
is actually
entire
quite
game.
appropriate.
On the
You know,
other
I
hand,
can give you
if the
easily
flashlight
100
is known
reasons
to be
to be
off in a
terrified.
given area, a
Okay,
designer can make
that was
use
my
of the
fault.
resulting rendering
I'll be
headroom
more
by
specific next
increasing the
time.
fidelity of the environment in other ways.
Shortly after adding the flashlight
Big
to the
fan of
game,
this
we
flashlight.
discovered that
And
playtesters
it's
would
not
frequently
unlike
brace
yourself,
their
it's
gun
also
hand with
sensitive
the
to the
flashlight
dark.
hand.
Oh yeah?
This meant
Meaning
that
it
the
should
players
go
had
on
to orient the
automatically when the
flashlight
lights
hand
go out.
upwardly to align
Oh.
the light with their aim.
Nice.
We decided to make this an automatic behavior of the offhand whenever it was brought close to the
Down
grip
to
of the gun.
3 magazines.
If you do this, you'll see that the offhand grips the gun in a natural pose, and the flashlight aligns with the aim. In fact, if you look closely at the end of the flashlight, you'll notice that it has a ball joint. This allows the flashlight to articulate based on whether the offhand is gripping the gun or not. The ball joint has 4 different orientations, one for each gun, and a neutral orientation for when the player is not supporting the gun to aim. These 4 orientations ensure that the flashlight is always pointed in an ideal direction for the player. In one-handed mode, the flashlight attaches to the gun hand at an orientation that is ideal for all scenarios.
last magazine. All right, Russ. Really need you to talk again.
Absolutely. Be specific.
Before. What was life like before the Combine?
Ah, excellent. Alyx, have you ever heard of a club sandwich?
Nope. Not once.
Right. To make a club sandwich, you need to start with bread. Not from a bread line, from a bakery across the street. Baked that day, okay? You add tomatoes, lettuce, not vegetable paste, fresh. Then you add bacon. That's from an animal we used to call the pig. You toast the bread, and you put all that inside it.
You guys had all that? That's insane.
It is, and I'm not done. Then you add a second sandwich on top of the first one. You put ham in it, also from a pig, and turkey from an animal we used to call the turkey, and more tomato, more lettuce, and a bunch of other things I'm forgetting. It was 6 inches tall and weighed a pound and had a dozen ingredients from 5 different continents. It was the most impossible food item you could imagine in any age before ours.
Wow.
I know, right?
That is... wow. Thanks, Russ.
You're welcome, Alyx.
When the writers create a new character, we try to write a variety of material from that character's perspective to help find their voice. What motivates them? What do they sound like? How do they relate to other characters? It's helpful to know the answers to questions like this early in a project, particularly when working with a team, where different people might end up writing for that character. The club sandwich story that Russell tells in this section started out as one of these writing exercises. The writing team wrote pages and pages of Russell telling Alyx stories about life before the Combine, getting irritated with it, telling bad jokes, pretty much the whole emotional spectrum. As we refined Russell's character, almost all of that fell by the wayside. We needed to do that work to get to Russell, but most of it didn't sound like Russell anymore. Later in the project, we decided to make Alyx scared of the so we needed Russell to talk a lot in this section to keep Alyx calm. It didn't matter what he was saying, it just had to be this voice in the darkness that she was grabbing onto.
3 left.
And then we remembered, hey, didn't we write a rambling sandwich monologue a year ago? And the club sandwich speech was resurrected.
Last mag.
Wait, is that a dead Combine soldier?
Yeah. When you guys were off stealing the reactor, I saw the Combine moving supplies in here. So, I guess they're interested in this place again.
Right, we'll keep an eye out. Something's definitely up. Alyx, manhack, watch out!
See it. Okay, so right now, what it's like to live on Earth on a scale of 1 to 10. I'd say we're at a 2.
Yep, could always get worse.
What would you rate it before the Combine showed up?
Ooh, that's a toughie. I don't know. Good day? I'd say 6. Yeah, strong 6.
6? That's not great.
Well, that's life, Alyx. You know, it's not always great.
Well, maybe we get the Combine off Earth and we could shoot for like an 8, you know?
Ooh, an 8. Yeah, that really would be nice. Really nice.
Oh, holy ish.
Building a Half-Life game, we try to start playtesting as soon as we can, even when we only have 10 or 15 minutes of gameplay built. We find it extremely helpful to see how players are reacting to what we've made as soon as possible. One of the major ways playtesting impacted Half-Life Alyx was in revealing how players reacted to the density of interactive elements in the world. Before we began, we were already aware that players would likely spend more time paying attention to the details of the world around them in VR, but we were unprepared for how significant this would be. Seeing some players spend 30 minutes messing around with a single interactive object really opened our eyes. As a result of those playtesting observations, we spend much of our development time focusing on the environment around the player and the level of details and interactivity to be found there. It might seem surprising that we didn't start with the assumption that we wouldn't need to spend that amount of time on the world, but the reality of game development is that we always have a finite amount of time to build a game and we're always making trade-offs. In the ideal case, we spend our finite time on whatever contributes the most to the player's experience. So, playtesting early, and thereby getting a better sense of what elements are contributing to the player experience, help us understand where to spend the limited time we have. In this case, those early playtests told us to significantly increase the amount we should budget for creating the world details and interactivity.
Barnacles are a unique enemy type in Half-Life Alyx in that they are static and often situated above the player's natural view direction. During testing in confined or dimly lit spaces, we often saw players walk into barnacle tongues without noticing them. One way we addressed this was with audio. In particular, we made idle barnacles emit subtle breathing, croaking, and grumbling sounds like the following. These sounds helped alert players to the presence of barnacles, and also made them seem like living creatures that were always active, not just a mechanical piece of gameplay that responded only to the player's actions. The head-related transfer functions available in Steam Audio were especially helpful, as they made it possible to accurately spatialize barnacle sounds so that the players could tell that the sounds were coming from above.
Incarnations of manhacks were frustrating to fight in VR, since their audio was not providing enough information about their location. They seemed to appear from nowhere, and even when close to the player, they lacked a dramatic presence. We tried a variety of layered sounds with varying distance fall-offs, but this often created more confusion, especially when multiple manhacks were nearby. Our ultimate solution to the problem consisted of two parts. The first was to make manhacks emit the following alarm-like warning sound when they first came into range or were deployed by a combine soldier. The second part of our solution was to add more aggressive looping sounds with short fall-off distances. The short fall-off of these sound loops meant that this specific component of manhack's sound incarnations of manhacks were frustrating to fight in VR, since their audio was not providing enough information about their location. They seemed to appear from nowhere, and even when close to the player, they lacked a dramatic presence. We tried a variety of layered sounds with varying distance fall-offs, but this often created more confusion, especially when multiple manhacks were nearby. Our ultimate solution to the problem consisted of two parts. The first was to make manhacks emit the following alarm-like warning sound when they first came into range or were deployed by a combine soldier. The second part of our solution was to add more aggressive looping sounds with short fall-off distances. The short fall-off of these sound loops meant that this specific component of manhack's sound treatment would only be audible quite near the player. Thus, when players heard these sounds, they knew that manhacks had begun hunting them, and one or more was getting close enough to be of concern.
Before Final Out was added, the cramped dark area with this level did not take players very long to traverse. But as the fidelity of the game increased, players spent more and more time getting to this point. We've learned over the years, too much time in dark underground areas can become fatiguing to players, and this is even more significant in VR. This outdoor section provides a change of pace and a brief respite from the dark. Not only does it give players something visually different and interesting to look at, it allows them to clearly see and assess threat in an open space, allowing them to get some easy kills with a little stress. It was also important to provide some variety here, as players are about to head into a dark area that requires precision shooting and a flashlight usage.
Last mag.
Permitted to receive this message.
3 shells left. Last one. Last shell. So, when we get the Combine off of Earth, what are you gonna do?
I'm going full production mode on the Russells, of course.
Oh, of course. You'll be sitting on a landmine.
Gold mine, yep. So here's the plan. Conservative estimate, I figure 1 year to get the world unconquered by the Combine, get them off the planet. So that's year 1, then another year to mass produce the Russells. Although, just quietly, we will need to rebuild society first, you know, to get some basic infrastructure, jobs, money, that sort of thing. Otherwise people won't be able to buy them, you know. So, yeah, 3-year plan. Let's slot the infrastructure thing in for year 2.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You're gonna want to put that in year 2.
This section, with a multitude of explosive barrels embedded in Zen overgrowth, was designed to switch up player expectations and change the pacing of the level. Prior to this point in the game, explosive barrels and canisters were used as offensive weapons. In this space, they're deadly to the player. If a barrel or canister does explode, it sets off a fatal chain reaction. This change in priority forces players to aim carefully and adds intensity without combat. This has the positive side effect of training players to utilize the pistol even more effectively. While the automatic alignment of the flashlight with a braced weapon is useful in direct combat, in this section we observed players taking advantage of the decoupled weapon and flashlight as they illuminated and targeted barnacles in the intricate Zen foliage overhead.
Whoa, careful, careful!
Oh boy. Getting dark again.
We decided early on that the environments we wanted to portray in Half-Life Alyx would benefit from an investment in high-quality volumetric lighting. This component of illumination is an indispensable tool, not just for creating atmosphere, but for drawing the player's attention to critical gameplay elements. Our system works in 3 phases. In the first phase, illumination from static light sources is captured in a 3-level hierarchical volumetric clip map surrounding the player. The highest resolution
Think you'd have a
level
job
of this
for
clip map
me?
measures 1
Job?
cubic inch per
Alyx,
pixel.
you
The
invented
clip
the
map
Alyx.
is updated
Of
incrementally,
course you can
less
have a
than once
job.
per frame,
We could be
as
partners.
the player moves throughout the scene.
Oh, well,
In the second phase, a compute
well, there
shader
would be stock
ray
options.
marches and view
5
space
to 10
throughout the
year
clip
vesting
maps,
period, obviously.
accumulating static
Could be
lighting,
very
dynamic
lucrative for you,
lighting, and
Alyx,
volumetric
in the long
extinction.
I don't know what
Ray
any of that
marching is
meant,
performed
but
every frame
sounds
and
good,
employs temporal
partner.
anti-aliasing to
Yep,
improve
sounds
quality.
good.
In the
Alyx.
final phase, we resample lighting and volumetric scattering from the prior phase for each frame, once per frame. The result is a texture that describes, for any given view space depth, volumetric scattering and extinction, which we apply during forward rendering.
Combine. Russ, these guys have automatic weapons.
They're alien commandos. Of course they have automatic weapons. We'd have them too, but Combine weapons are gene-coded, so out of luck. Unless you find one that's unbonded, or you're open to some minor genetic modification.
I'm good, Russ. I'm just gonna roll with these genes that I've got.
We always introduce new enemies at a distance, and never while the player is under duress. Here, the player is able to observe the Combine soldiers killing some wandering zombies, giving the player an idea of how powerful the soldiers are, and how they might operate in combat. We located the Combine far enough away that it was plausible that they would not notice the player, but close enough that the player could choose to engage, but remain relatively safe from return fire.
with a Combine soldier caused a number of issues in playtesting. The biggest one was that players were often surprised when the soldiers started shooting at them. Some players who were new to the Half-Life series had no idea who these soldiers were, but it's also been hours of game time since players saw another human, and we found that many players weren't willing to immediately start shooting. Some players also wonder why Alyx moved so quickly to killing other humans. This area was designed to demonstrate that Combine soldiers are hostile and will attack on sight, giving the player a reason to want to shoot back. It starts with the dialogue preceding the encounter, where the player overhears the Combine discussing the problem of scavengers in the quarantine zone. Then, when the player finally achieves visual contact with the first Combine fighter, they witness that soldier in the process executing a civilian target.
Nearview Junction! We're here!
Combine!
This was it! Get down!
Soldier AI has been a mainstay of the Half-Life series, so we were excited to see how their design would be impacted by the move to VR. Our early playtesting against a Half-Life 2 Combine Soldier AI in VR immediately made an impression clear. At first, players did not like the shot, and often had a visceral negative response. The soldiers frequently ran at players at full speed, firing all the while, and we discovered that the speed of Half-Life 2 combat was simply too overwhelming in VR. Also, players took longer to do everything in VR, especially the core action of spotting and aiming their weapon at an enemy.
Good, because we don't have much time.
As a result, the soldiers tended to live much longer in VR than they did in Half-Life 2. It was clear from these early playtests that the most common reaction among players was to immediately seek cover from enemy fire. So we started experimenting with changes to the Soldier AI, aimed at building a combat experience around players' tendency to seek cover. Early experiments were focused on keeping Combine soldiers at a comfortable distance from the player, while keeping them moving around enough to not have combat become too static. To create lulls in firing for players to peek out from cover, we prevented soldiers from shooting while on the run in most cases. To keep players from remaining stationary, we created a concept of flushing, where squads will attempt to flush the player out of cover, and we gave each class a soldier a different method of flushing out the player. But even in these early tests, it was also clear that players weren't capable of fighting soldiers until they'd gotten skilled in a number of basic combat actions, like reloading their gun without having to focus all their attention on it. So we were careful to slowly introduce the various types of soldiers, and even individual features within the soldier classes. For example, these early fights against Combine soldiers only feature the basic grunts, and these particular grunts don't carry grenades. This means they don't actually have the capability to flush a player out of cover. We found it was important in these first fights to give players all the time they need to learn to use cover effectively before we start introducing enemies that could try and flush them out.
There's a control station override nearby. should have plenty of time to get the override back online. Alright, I'll be able to stop the train right here.
You sure you can do that?
Absolutely. You just need to activate the terminal.
Nice.
Then you'll need to be ready for a fight. They're not going to give up your dad easily.
I'll be ready.
Right, that's the terminal there.
I'm on it.
Do hurry, though. Okay, no worries. But the train is coming. Just get me in. It'll only take a second. You're doing great.
Yep, doing great. No worries, no worries, no worries, no worries, no worries.
Okay, now just re-engage the system.
Is it supposed to come off?
That's the opposite of what it's supposed to do, Alyx.
What do I do now?
Well, don't panic. Or stop panicking if you
I'm
are.
not gotta be another way to stop them.
10 seconds, Alyx. Okay, just throw the switch there. 5 seconds.
It won't stay.
You've got to hold it down.
The rescue of Eli Vance. Crashing the Combine prison train that was transporting Eli felt like the exact right thing to accomplish these goals, and it gave us the opportunity to create some VR spectacle. We wanted to achieve the cinematic chaos of causing a train wreck, while giving the players an active role in the event. Our first attempts to design the scenario were a challenge. It turned out that directing the players' attention wasn't as simple as ensuring they were in the right position through gameplay. In our initial
There's gotta be another way to stop this train.
10 seconds, Alyx. Okay, just throw the switch there. 5 seconds.
non-combat mode for real players were fighting to achieve the cinematic chaos of causing a train wreck, while giving the players an active role in the event.
That worked?
Our first attempts to design the scenario were a challenge. It turned out that directing the players' attention wasn't as simple as ensuring they were in the right position through gameplay.
I
In
don't
our
know,
initial tests,
but we need to
players
find out.
frequently failed to see some or all of the spectacular train wreck. The crash was one of the first destruction sequences we put into the game, so we had a lot to learn about player behavior in VR and how to direct the player naturally to immerse them in the chaos. On top of that, to continually hit our target frame rate, we needed to create a cascading series of events, so that only some of the destruction is happening at any given time. Sound design, level design, effects, and animation had to be carefully coordinated to lead the player's attention through each stage of the wreck. For example, at the start of the crash, we used the sounds of train cars piling up in the distance, encouraging players to look in that direction before one of the train cars lifts up and blasts through the concrete connector.
Hurry, I'm losing my breath.
I'll be right there. One sec.
That collapse is used to direct the player's attention to their eventual path forward, and we wanted players to witness this destruction. Before bringing down the smokestack, we gave players a brief moment of rest, and again, use sound to draw their attention to the smokestack.
Hurry, baby.
Initially, we used a rumbling sound.
I'll be right there. One sec.
But we found this to be too subtle in practice, and instead added the transient explosion sound, which drew the player's attention towards the smokestack more reliably.
Okay, I'm gonna reach out and pull you up. It's gonna be okay.
We wanted to create
You ready?
just out of reach moment.
Give me your
where
hand.
The player physically saves him. But for the rest of the story to work, Alyx and Eli had to take different paths at the end of the scene. We tried a few different approaches, including a version where Eli was hanging from a ledge just in front of the player, and the player could reach down to attempt to grab Eli's hand to pull him up. In practice, however, players' hands would collide with the real-world floor. Not only did this make it impossible to reach Eli, it took players out of the moment, wrecking the emotion.
Just stay there. I'm gonna figure out how to get over to you.
Had to take different paths.
Alyx,
we
listen.
tried an approach where Alyx rescued Eli, but he was injured and couldn't
A
proceed.
super weapon?
Unfortunately, many players would
They got it here in the QZ in some kind of vault, but they're about to move it.
Eventually,
Where, I don't know, but it's gonna be soon.
Then we gotta steal it before they do.
Separating Eli from the player with the Vortigaunt's rescue
I managed to pocket
made for
this
a much more
Combine data
meaningful
pod.
return and
If I can
fulfillment
decrypt it,
of the
we can
Vortigaunt's
figure out how to
promise
use their
help
weapon
Alyx.
against them.
So what's the
The
plan?
data pod
You
that
head
Eli
to the vault.
found was
I'll
an
take this
addition
thing back to
that not
Russell's
only
and get
let
to
us
work.
integrate Eli back into the
where is the
story
vault?
later,
Dad,
but
where's
also
the
gave
vault?
him something to do, so there was a much stronger reason why he would not accompany the player
Yes.
on their journey.
Look to the start. Got it. Dad?
It's right in the middle of the QZ, and it's big. Get above ground and see what you can find.
I will accompany the Eli van.
and ensure his safety.
Great. Thank you. Dad, I'm gonna go find this vault.
Go! Stay safe, baby. I love you.
I love you too.
I love you too.
Thank you. Hey, Russ. Keep an eye out for Dad, okay?
I'll let you know if he gets here. When he gets here.